Well, hello. Um, just as a short notice before I actually start, this presentation I'm about to give now contains some small fonts and some figures, and it would be important for you to be able to read them. So I would like to ask you to check whether you're capable of reading the marked line on the Snellen chart displayed here. And if this is not the case, maybe either use your glasses if you have some, or retrieve a copy of the slides under the link given at the bottom of the slide here. Because if you can't read the figures, you'll miss some of the important points, I guess. Well, so then, officially welcome to my talk about the paper termed Articulation of Subject-Oriented Business Process Models. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to Kiel because of the strikes in the German railroad network. So I'm trying to give this presentation here via a recording. So I hope this is a more or less appropriate substitute for me being here in person and presenting those slides to you. And I'll start out with not talking at all, actually, and would like to ask you to just have a look at the images on the next slide and try to capture what they say. So basically, this is the takeaway message of the whole talk. What I want you to be aware of is the impact of not only the models you create, but also the models you have in your head shaping your perception of reality and how you interpret what you perceive and deem relevant for a certain subject. And by the way, so with this in mind, let me start to motivate what we are doing here. The challenge we're facing is that we have to somehow depict what we consider an organizational reality, work process in reality, in a business process model, in our case in a subject-oriented business process model. And as we are all aware, there unfortunately is no direct way to let the business process model somehow magically emerge from reality. So that simply does not work. We always have to somehow have a mediator who's creating this business process model. In the standard case, this could be a modeler or a process analyst who perceives the reality, the real phenomena in the real world that needs to be depicted in the process model, and then finally creates the model out of his perceptions. If we have a skilled modeler, this link between what the modeler has in his mind towards the business process model shouldn't be a real problem. Unfortunately, creating an appropriate picture of the real work process as perceived by the actors in the modeler's mind isn't that easy. It's always shaped by the assumptions of the modeler. It's always somehow constrained by the perceptual borders of the modeler. Is not able to perceive the whole work process as it's perceived by the actors. So what we normally do is we do not rely simply on observation, but take the actors themselves into consideration, let them reflect upon how they work in the real work environment, and then interact somehow with the modeler to finally create the business process model mediated by the modeler. This reflection on reality is not necessarily easy. People who are not accommodated to stepping out of their work process, of their work context, and taking a bird's eye view, reflecting on how they actually work and interact with others, sometimes have a hard time in appropriately describing what they are doing. And even harder normally is this link, where the different models, mental models in this case, between the actor's minds, who are domain experts, and the model's minds or worldviews, who is an expert in modeling, but not necessarily in the modeling domain, collide and somehow always create misunderstandings and gaps in the business process model, which again then does not appropriately reflect how people perceive their work. What has been proposed in literature several times is to try and develop a modeling method that does not rely on a modeler, rather putting the actors in charge of modeling themselves and only having a facilitator supporting the modeling process. You all know this. This is also described in the S-BPM modeling process descriptions that have been published over the last years. Unfortunately, in our experiences, this green arrow we have now on our slide is not appropriate in this case. Actors who normally don't have any clue about conceptual modeling or business process modeling have a hard time in appropriately depicting their perceptions of reality in a business process model, and they need support. And the aim of what we're trying to do here in the work I'm presenting here is providing some kind of procedural scaffold that supports the actors on the one hand to appropriately articulate what they are doing in their work process, or at least their perceptions of the work process, and still maintain a valid S-BPM model as a result. So we somehow have conflicting requirements. On the one hand, creating a formally syntactically correct process model. On the other hand, not constraining actors in articulating their perceptions of work. Well, and in the next few minutes, I'll try to describe and show you what we came up with over the last few years. I just noted the difference between maybe telling and showing. And if you have a look at this figure here, the thing I want to convey here is that telling is not always easy for people not accommodated with telling about their work. It's easier for them to show. Still, we somehow need to get them to tell us what they think their work is about, because we need to externalize and externally represent it in our process model. So we try to facilitate the telling process by allowing people to show how they think they work and how they interact. So this whole method I'm describing in a few minutes is based on the assumption that people have an easier time telling about work if they have explicit artifacts allowing them to show how they think they are working. Another thing to consider in this context is that normally we don't have a single actor performing a work process. Work is normally inherently cooperative, so we always have several actors involved. And none of them has a complete picture of the work environment. All of them have their tasks, and all of them only basically perceive what they are doing and maybe whom they are interacting with. Still, they have assumptions. They have assumptions of how the others perform the work, what the others are going to provide. But these assumptions are only based on their partial perception of reality. So they actually do not have a complete picture of reality, but each of them has a particular view on one part of the work process in the real world that overlap in some areas. And especially in these areas of overlap, they have assumptions of what the others are going to do. So they have something called closure in terms of drawing conclusions about the behavior or the rationale of others from their own perceptions. And what we need to do is we need to make people aware of their assumptions, of their closures, and allow them to align their views. It's not necessarily relevant to get everybody a complete picture of the overall work process. What still is important is that people need to have a clear picture of how they interact with others, so to have a clear understanding of the interfaces. The hypothesis that is the basis of the work I'm presenting here is that subject-to-subject closure, so not requiring a global overview of the work process, but only a local context, is easier for people than, as I said, the global action-to-action closure that would require this bird's-eye view about the overall work process. So, and based on this assumption, we have tried to develop a modeling procedure that accommodates to the requirements of those unexperienced modelers and still lead to a valid subject-oriented business process. We do this in two steps. First, we let the people create models of their individual perceptions of what they are doing. We call this individual articulation. And in a second step, we let them collaboratively consolidate their views to a common overall picture. So the goal is to, in the first instance, uncover and externalize those individual views for all of them, and finally create a common understanding of the work process, at least at the relevant interfaces. We do this by means of modeling, and we've experimented with different modeling methods and finally came up with something really easy and really vague in terms of semantical definition. We only have 3 modeling elements following the subject-to-subject paradigm I just described before. We have one element representing who is involved, without differentiating whether we are talking about actual persons or roles or organizational units. Don't care at all. We have one element referring to the what, and so activities, and one element referring to what is exchanged between the actors or the who elements, in terms of information, but also in terms of resources, of goods, whatever. Again, remains vague because people have a hard time deciding whether something really is information or a document or something else. You'll see some examples afterwards. Exchange is the most generic term we came up with, and that seems to work for most people. In this individual articulation phase, so as you remember, I said we have a two-step articulation process. In this individual articulation phase, every participant involved in modeling, every actor, describes his or her contribution to the work process individually, without any interaction to the others. So what they are doing, let me give you an example. They start out with having one subject, one actor, one who element describing themselves, representing themselves, and then describe what they are doing in a sequence. So activity 1, for example. And as soon as they perceive that they interact with others, like providing some information or resources or a document to somebody else or receiving it, they specify another who element describing their communication partner, and place an exchange element representing this exchange. Then we might, for example, so we provide a document with some information to somebody else, and then we expect some information from this communication partner, which then enables us to perform activity 2. Maybe we then continue with activity 3, and finally we have another communication partner, like subject 3, whom we provide again with further information. So this seems to be very trivial, but in our experiences, and we made a rather large number of real-world case studies here, so something like 30 or 40 practical workshops where we deployed this methodology. People have a really hard time in describing the work, also with this very fundamental, very basic and vague semantical framework. Especially this exchange or information or message or whatever you refer to it is hard for people. So they came up, for example, with communication channels like WhatsApp in this case. Or they depicted something like decisions here, or had even activities as exchange elements. So they were completely unsure how to use those elements, and normally require 1 or 2 examples until they fully understand what is expected from them. As soon as they have the fundamental idea, it's pretty easy for them, and they are rather quick to generate those models. So we have everybody doing this individual articulation part, and then continue with the collaborative consolidation. On this slide, you just schematically see what's happening here. So we take those individual models and create one common model out of it. And again, there's a procedure for this, which helps people to uncover different perceptions they have. As you remember, they have individually created their models of their contributions, and it's very likely that those do not fully fit. And these misfits, maybe these incompletenesses, need to be resolved somehow. And the method we are proposing makes these mismatches explicitly visible and does not allow people to simply accept them, but requires them to resolve them. So we somehow follow a storytelling approach here by now letting people describe what they are doing, again, using the same concepts they came up with in the first step. But then, as soon as they have an exchange in their mind, having the other step in and check whether there is a match. So in this case, subject 1 offers a document to subject 2. In the next step, subject 2 would step in and say, okay, I also see that I'm expecting this document, so we have a match here, placing his or her element on the top of the others, of the other element, and continuing modeling himself. So continuing with another activity and an information that is provided back to subject 1. Having subject 1 now step in again and checking whether this offered information has a fit in his individual model. Fortunately, now this is the case, so we have information 1 also fitting here, and continue with activity 2 of subject 1. And subject 1 now sees, okay, after activity 1, I have another exchange element to make or to provide to subject 3. Subject 3 steps in and has a match in this perceived collaboration and also depicts this in the model. Subject 3 then steps in and says, okay, after I have received information 2, I can perform activity 2, but there is one activity I independently of you perform beforehand, and this is activity 3.1. And finally, we finish our model with subject 1 completing his description of what he is doing. So we now created something that looks similar to a subject-oriented business process model, but is semantically somehow restricted. I will get back to those restrictions in just a few minutes, but let me first show you what this methodology provides us with in terms of articulation. What becomes clearly visible during this consolidation part is mismatches in expected and provided exchanges. So in an ideal world, there should always be 2 matching yellow cards. As this normally is not the case, each mismatch is an indicator for us to have the need to negotiate how collaboration is actually conducted in this case. An even more frequent difference between those individual models is naming differences. So maybe using the same designator for 2 different things, or even more commonly, naming things differently and meaning actually the same things. So if a match is identified, but the designators, the names on the elements are different, we need to agree on, or at least be aware that there's 2 different notions how to refer to some kind of exchange. This might also be the case for one of the red, on one of the what elements, or even for one of the blue elements. But what this method explicitly makes visible is those different notions that are used. The most severe problem that can occur here is differences in the perception of who is actually involved. So it might be the case that subject 1 thinks he's about to interact with subject 2 and subject 2 does not recognize this. This might go so far that we have interaction modeled with people not involved in the modeling workshop at all. So having something like an external subject that ultimately needs to be resolved by involving a representative of that subject at all. So as soon as we have resolved this, we can transform the model we have to a syntactically valid S-BPM model. There's a set of rules that clearly describes how the models need to be transformed. Those are given in the paper. I won't go in more detail into them. What is important? While the models we are creating are still syntactically valid, they are semantically incomplete. You have recognized, obviously, that we are not creating a process model here. We are merely creating a model of one single case here. We are lacking decision elements. We're lacking everything that indicates control flow, basically. And we're addressing this need in a separate step I will just describe in 2 minutes. But this next step relies on a successful transformation to an S-BPM model. Just to give you a few impressions what people come up with, that's examples from real-world workshops that have not been facilitated by an expert in the methodology. So that's what people came up with without too much facilitation. This is a pretty good model that can be transformed to S-BPM nearly automatically. The only smaller issues being marked here with the dashed circles. And people also come up with something like this, which is harder to transform or cannot be transformed automatically at all, but requires some interactive transformation process that we elaborated on in more detail in the paper. And sometimes people even come up with something like this, where we do not have any chance at all for automatic transformation. What is important still is that this model you're seeing here still served the process of articulation, so still served the aim of creating a shared understanding of the work process. So the participants in that workshop, of which this image is the result here, were pretty happy with the result. They really felt that they had a much better understanding of how they collaborate. But still, we can't do anything with this model in terms of transformation to a formally correct business process modeling or an S-BPM model. But if this transformation works, we now can make use of the executability of an S-BPM model to further refine our model. And that's why we embedded this methodology I just described in a bigger framework that on the one hand offers one preceding step that we simply called setting the stage, and that is only required if we have a very heterogeneous set of participants stemming from different disciplines, where this issue of vocabulary I referred to before is that severe that we need to make an explicit articulation step that clarifies on what we are talking about when we use some notions. And after successful transformation to S-BPM, we try to refine the model we have towards a complete process model by simulated enactment. So what we're doing is we take the single case model and then enact the S-BPM model in a workflow engine and have it altered on the fly. So basically playing through the process, and as soon as we encounter a gap or an inconsistency or an error, we are simply altering the process while the instance is executed. So we've created in the course of the Janus project that you might have seen on the first slide, which this research here is a result of. We have created a workflow engine that allows us to modify the processes while instances are executed, and that allows us to play through a process and alter it on the fly. If you want to have some background here, as this is some sort of wrap-up presentation, as Janus is coming to its end now after 4 years of a project, you might want to have a look at the publications we had at the earlier S-BPM conferences, which give a bit of a background of what we're doing in terms of S-BPM based modeling here. So what's happening is that iteratively, while playing through the process, the amount of shared understanding between the people increases and gets bigger and bigger, so that we finally end up with less closure about what the others are doing, but more knowledge in the individual actors' minds. And finally, we end up with a complete S-BPM model that can then be used for workflow support, for process execution. This has already been played through several times. This works. We have done some case studies that are about to be published, hopefully in the next few months. And that will provide pointers to in one of the next conferences. So what I want you, again, to take away from this presentation, and I'm coming to an end now, is that the paradigm S-BPM is built upon, that human work is ultimately built upon communication, should not only be considered for execution time, like it's only currently in S-BPM, but also for modeling time. That communication and creating a shared understanding of what people do is highly relevant during modeling, and we need to be aware of how people can be supported in creating a shared understanding. And what we have been proposing here is a first step, hopefully a first step towards this issue, and I would be happy if some of you pick up on those ideas and work with us to further improve the systems and the methods in this area. Well, as you might have assumed, I did not draw all those pictures myself. This is also not pictures from a process modeling book. This is rather pictures from a book on understanding comics. So for everybody who's interested in this area, there's a big recommendation on how to understand perception of the world and how to depict it. Actually, this book has finally allowed me to understand process modeling in my opinion. So strong recommendation. Maybe have a look at this book. And that's it for now. Unfortunately, I'm not here to answer questions myself, but maybe Chris can take over here and answer questions if you have any. Thank you.